Alright, welcome back to BAYOURATT Reel Services YouTube channel, Bayou Reels. We're going to reassemble this Shimano Bantam Curado CU-200. We've already ran everything through the ultrasonic washer. I've already inspected all the parts, the gears, the bearings. Nothing's broken, nothing's worn. I did replace a couple of bearings if you watched the disassembly video that had some rust on them. So now we're just going to start to reassemble everything. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you to please like this video, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Your comments could be questions about reels or about my filming in general. If you have any tips or suggestions, I am all ears and happy to listen to them. And so to get started to reassemble this reel, I like to kind of knock out some of the low-hanging fruit, or things that I like to get out of the way before I start to try to reassemble the reel as a whole. And I know on this one we took apart the locking mechanism for the palm plate. So what I'm going to need to do is reassemble that component first, or what I want to do is reassemble that component first. So I have the parts here. Let me find my two screws. And so what we have is this this mechanism here, which is a snap piece. Let me zoom in for you some so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. This has a slider bar with a spring. This spring is going to fit on this little tab on this bar, and you can see that it has it 90s over, 90s back down. That's going to fit inside of this mechanism this way, but what I'm going to need to do is put that spring in there. So I'm going to put the spring on the tab first. And then go in at an angle with the spring down and push it down into place, and goes in pretty smooth. Next I'm going to take the plate. Well, hold on. First, this needs to go on top. What I want is for the top of the part that flips out, I want that pointing up. So that's going to go here. Then I'm going to put this plate back on top. You have to line up the smaller holes, which I don't know if it shows up on camera, has a taper for it, and that matches the taper on the head of the screw. The other holes line up on these two black tabs here and here. So that it sits in place. Didn't quite land that screw in right. The first screw and second screw. Now that that's in place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this wear pad back in place, as well as the bearing that goes in here. I've already oiled the bearings. I do that right when they come out of the ultrasonic washing machine, so that they don't really have any time to get any kind of surface rust. But what I do is I do drop a little piece of oil on this wear plate. Put that bearing in place. And then put this ring back in place. Okay, now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and put the spool bearing back on, which, if you remember, we put our pin here. And I know I mentioned this already, but I already put oil. I already oiled all the bearings. So, I guess I don't really do that on the video. I guess I can do that next time I make a video. But I'm going to put that bearing back on the spool. Let me zoom in a little bit for you. And then I'm going to take the pin and push it as far as I can with my finger. I mean, I'm not going to jam it, but just set it in place. And then I'm going to use my my bass zone tool. Now, you don't necessarily have to do this if you don't have the right tool, but I just happen to have it because I run a reel service business. You don't have to take this bearing off to clean it or to re-oil it. You can just wash it like you would any other parts, and then just add oil to it while it's on the shaft, because you can spin it with your hand here, with your finger. So that spool's done. So next, I am going to start to reassemble things back to the body of the reel. I'm going to start by putting a light coat of grease on the inside of the body here, and then kind of going a little heavy where the kick out arm rides and slides in, which on this reel is inside of this groove. Now this customer, I know, primarily uses these reels when he does saltwater fishing, inshore saltwater for redfish and whatnot. So I'm probably going to put a little bit more grease in than I normally would. So the first thing that needs to go on here is the thumb bar and the arm for the thumb bar. You need to take the thumb bar and put it on this pin first, and then put the arm on. And while you're holding all that together, you can flip it over with the thumb all the way up, thumb bar all the way up, and set your screw in place, because you're going to have to go through the body of the reel to get to it or line up with it properly. Like this. I'm trying to not make shadows. Still haven't quite figured out my lighting. Now from here, I'm going to do something a little different than what I normally do on bait casters. Is I'm going to put the drive shaft on next, because of the plate that goes on from the inside of the body of the reel, this black plate. If you remember when we took this reel apart, where we had to take the E-clip off from the inside of the reel, and you have to remove this black plate first. That whole process is a lot easier if you do that next, before the worm gear before assembling the worm gear on. So to assemble the drive shaft to the body of the reel, you're going to need to take your idle drive shaft gear, and which is cupped. If you look at it closely, it's cupped on one side. That cup side goes down towards the reel here to fit over that ring. So you're going to need to put this in the uncupped side, and it is key to go in a certain way. I know that I need these two. So next is going to be the drive shaft bearing. It goes on the drive shaft. And then out of the washers that you took out, you need the smallest one. Goes on next, because that goes in between the bearing and the body of the reel. So I'm going to put that in. and then I'm going to hold on to the body of the reel but set the drive shaft down so everything stays lined up. Now you have two washers here, a brass washer and like a black. It's not metal, but it is brittle. It won't bend, it'll break, so be careful with this washer. That washer goes on first, and then the brass washer. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to put just a little bit grease on it. See if I can zoom in well enough for you to see what I'm doing inside of the reel. So you can see right there the brass washer. Now from there you're going to have to put the E-clip on. Sorry about that. So you can see I snapped the E-clip on here, and then in that area you can see there's two holes on each side which match the cover plate. So the cover plate has two little tabs on the underneath of it, and that's what fits in two of those holes, and then the other two holes are screw holes. Now this almost has to be perfectly lined up before you can really push down on it. If you can see that. This has a really tight fit into those two holes. There we go. So you want to make sure that it's sitting flush against the body. When it slides in, you're going to feel it slide in. You're going to be able to tell. Now there's two screw holes. And these take those two black screws. One, two, and I have my smaller Phillips screwdriver that fits through this hole and through the reel to screw these two screws in. Oh, that's a pretty good angle right there. Okay. And then the last piece is I have my little short silver screw that goes in this hole that sort of catches the edge of the arm that's connected to the thumb bar. What did I do with my screwdriver? You can't really see what I'm doing. So if you see, it kind of catches the corner of this arm here. So now that that's together, we're going to go ahead and assemble the worm gear. Now, the first thing you can do on this reel is set the shaft in and the line guide. It's keyed, so it can only go one way. Let me hit this with the brush. There was some cleaning residue that got caught in the corners of this line guide. So you want to put a line guide on a tube, and the tube is keyed to fit in the handle side of the body. Set that down. I'm going to take the actual worm gear with the tooth side on the end, put it through the idle gear, turn the idle gear so that it locks into place, and then hold my thumb on it. This sleeve goes in from the back side with the rimmed edge towards that idle gear, and you can slide that into the line guide and then line up the gears with the plastic drive gear. I'm going to put my finger over it and I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to put this small brass washer on. I'm going to put just a little dab of grease, and then I'm going to put the E-clip on. And then use a flathead screwdriver to snap it into place. Now from there, I'm going to insert the pawl, making sure that the teeth are lined up. So if you set the reel down, you can see that the pawl has teeth that sort of V, and you want those to line up with the reel this way whenever you first insert it. And then I just kind of put my finger on top of the bottom of the pawl and then wiggle the line guide till I feel it slide into place. Put a small drop of oil here, and then I'm going to put the cap back on. Move it to one side and then use a flathead screwdriver to tighten this cap a little bit. This cap will break, so don't over tighten it. You don't have to bear down on it. And then what I do to kind of test it is I'll push my finger against it when it gets to one side and keep turning it and make sure that it doesn't get hung up on one side. Now your line guide is going to be a little loose because on the face of it is a piece that fits on the faceplate that keeps it lined up. This reel doesn't have another cross pin. So there's your worm gear. What I also try to do right now before I put the faceplate on is I have the grease that I use for the worm gear, and I'll ride the worm gear all the way to, I'll ride the line guide all the way to one side, and I'll start to grease inside of here. So fill that with grease. Turn it all the way to the opposite side. Fill that side with grease. I'm being pretty liberal with it. And then turn it back and forth a few times. See if there's any bare metal that I can kind of still see where maybe some grease didn't catch or didn't spread out to. But running this back and forth will help spread your grease out. And then I'll just kind of take my towel and any kind of excess grease that might be on the outside of it, which really won't hurt anything if you leave it. So that is greased. Next we're going to be putting the cam together and the brake system. So this reel only has one spring. What you want to make sure is that before you start this process, the thumb bar is pushed all the way up. I'm going to take some grease and I'm going to put it on this arm, and then I'm going to take the spring, put the spring in place, and then put the kick out arm on top of it. And well, I guess I can zoom in there some more too. So there's a hole here, which is where the long arm of the spring goes. If you notice, this spring has a long arm and a short arm. The long arm goes down in this hole, and then your kick out arm has a hole for the short side of the spring. And you want to make sure that arm here lands in that groove, because this is the groove that it rides back and forth in. Then I'm going to take the cam and I'm going to start it off at an angle, lining up the tab and the hole on the kick out arm, and then just kind of holding everything down. I'm going to rotate it till it fits into place, because you want to make sure that this metal tab on this arm fits inside of that groove on the cam. If you can see that. Now I'm keeping my finger on it because the spring does create some tension. I don't want it to pop off. Now there's the post plate here. Once you put that in place and screw it down, it's going to hold everything together. So I do that next. I don't tighten down the first screw all the way because I want to be able to move the plate around to line up the second screw. And I see that I'm still creating a lot of shadows. Screw these two down. You have to be mindful that the plate lands where it's supposed to. There's a black part of the frame that's going to fit flush with the plate. Just check these screws, and I'm going to check this one while I'm here. Now that's together, I'm going to put the pinion gear and the yoke plate on. If you look at the yoke plate, there's a slanted side on each side. That's the part that goes down, and it's going to slide on these two slanted pieces on the cam. I just put a little dab of grease there. And on the other side, I'm going to put the pinion in the yoke. Now, if you look at your pinion gear, the bottom side of it has some grooves cut in it, and what actually fits into those grooves is the keeper pin that keeps the bearing on the spool shaft, like this. It's not focusing. So your spool shaft is going to ride in this bearing, and that keeper pin fits in those grooves. Put that on the post. Making sure that the pinion gear lands inside of the hole, and then push this all the way down. Now again, you have to make sure that your thumb bar is all the way up. I'm not going to put the springs on these posts yet, because I'm going to reassemble the drive gear and the drag system before I do that. One of the things that I like to do here is I like to put a little bit of grease where these two gears interact. So this is the idle gear on the worm gear and line guide system, and it interacts with a plastic gear that's on the bottom of the drive shaft. And and I just like to put some grease on there so that it helps to maintain the longevity of these plastic gears. So what you're going to need is your drive gear, your dog gear, and your drag washers, which is all of this here. The first thing that goes down is this kick out dog, and you can see that this is key to fit on the drive shaft a certain way, so you make sure that lands where it's supposed to. The next piece is going to be this smaller drag washer, and I have some Shimano drag grease. Just kind of tap my finger in it and then rub it in, going around. You don't want to go too heavy, but you do want to get it coated evenly. Put that down. Then next I'm going to grease the drive gear, which I use my greaser, space age greaser here. Daiwa makes this. I'm going to, what I do is I point the tip up against the teeth as close as I can, and then shoot the gear in it so that it gets into the teeth, and I go around about halfway. That's showing up kind of good. And then what I do is I take my finger and I run it pushing down so that I kind of force that grease into the teeth, and I'm also wiping excess at the same time. But what I can do is when I turn it, I can sort of see where some grease maybe didn't get into the gear teeth, and just kind of dab it and keep running my finger over it. And then what I'll do once I'm done with this is I'll take a towel and I'll wipe it on the inside to make sure that there's none of this blue grease on the inside where the drag washers go, and sort of wipe it on the inside here, and then here on the outside I'll just kind of give it a little brush towards the outside of the gears of the teeth. So that's going to go down next. And then I put my finger on the pinion gear and I kind of pull it back a little bit, just so that it holds it a little bit in place, and you can line this gear up. Now I'm going to wipe my fingers real good. I'm going to take my Shimano grease and this drag washer, and I'm going to coat this one in grease. I don't know if coat is the right word, because I'm not getting real heavy. I just want to make sure that there's no dry spots on it. You don't want to put too much grease, because then your drag is going to slip some. And I know I keep dabbing my finger, but I'm actually not picking up a whole lot of grease here. Just kind of making sure that it's spread evenly and that it's not too heavy. I'm going to set that in place. I'm going to take this washer, whatever excess grease is on my fingers, I rub it on that washer. This washer is keyed also. Kind of give that a little push down. Now that's set in place. What I can do now is, while I'm holding it upright, I'm going to put the faceplate on, because I'm getting close to putting the side plate back on. So I'll put the faceplate back on, making sure that the bottom part of this faceplate fits in that groove for the line guide correctly. I'm going to put the sleeve, the roller bearing sleeve, onto the drive shaft, which is keyed. You see the two tabs on it, that's the bottom, and that fits inside of that top washer. I'm going to put my two springs on the yoke plate. I just give them a little bitty dab in this grease. Okay, and then now I'm going to be ready to put the side plate on. So now I'm ready to assemble the side plate onto the body of the reel. I'm going to have to take the one-way clutch bearing and put it back into the plate. So if you look at the one-way clutch bearing, it's got grooves on it, raised edges on it, but there's a small section of it that doesn't. That's the bottom part of it, and it fits from the outside in into the plate, and you can see grooves in the side plate. This is the handle side for how this bearing fits into place. So once you kind of line it up, you can push it in with your thumb. This particular reel, it's going to stop. You're not going to be able to push it all the way through, but some reels you can push them all the way through. What you're going to want to do is have them land flush. So you can push this one all the way through. You're going to have your screws ready. You have 4 black screws, 3 of them are the same length, and one is longer than the other 3, if you remember. That one goes on the bottom screw hole. So you're going to want to put this plate on, being mindful that this sleeve that's on the drive shaft has to fit inside of this roller bearing, which is your one-way bearing. So slide it on, hold it tight. I'm going to start from the bottom using my long screw first. I'm going to screw that down, making sure before I screw it down, I'm going to make sure that everything lines up right while I'm holding it tight, and everything fits tight and flush. So I can go ahead and put my other black screws in here. Tighten those down. Now while I'm here, what I also have is a silver screw that's for the other side of the faceplate here. And I'm going to tighten that one down. So the next step is to start getting things ready. Or the next step is sort of an intermediate step where you're not necessarily going to be putting all the handle and everything on, but you're going to be setting everything up. So it's important for you to put this next step. It's important to do this next step because you're going to need that resistance to help you put together the nuts and everything for the handle. So the first thing I do here is I take the last bearing that I have and I put it in where the spool tension cap goes. And you should have a spring that sort of tapers, and the bottom half of that spring sort of rolls in as a keeper for that that bearing, and then the spool tension cap goes on top. I like to take, because my grease that I use is super light, I'm going to put just the smallest dab in there on that plate that's inside of that cap, the brass plate. If your grease is a little too thick for that, you're totally fine with putting in whatever kind of oil you're using. If it's the Ardent Real Butter oil, or if you have one of these Daiwa needle oilers, or I've been using this sewing machine oil in my bearings, that's totally fine to put on that brass plate, which is a wear plate. So I'm going to put that on the reel body and just screw it in a couple of times. Nothing real tight. Put the spool in the reel, and then I'm going to take that, give it a little oil. Then we're going to put the palm side plate back on. Let's see. And then screw it back into place. Close it. Now we're ready to start reassembling the handle. So in order for us to reassemble the handle, we're going to need everything that's left. The first two things to go on are these two washers that are curved. Hopefully we can get that to come into play, into focus. So if you see this these two washers are actually curved, and you want them to face each other like a set of parentheses, then these are actually part of your drag. So the first one is going to be cupped facing out, and the other one's going to be cupped facing in, like this on the drive shaft. One, two, and then you have this washer that's brass on one side and has a felt sort of fiber on the other side. That brass side goes down towards the reel, and the felt side goes underneath this square nut, not the regular shaped nut, but the square nut. That's going to go on next, and then you screw that down. And this is why you want to put the spool and everything in, because you can hold the spool and the line guide with your index finger just to get this down. You're not going to go real tight. You can see how easy it is for me to turn it. You're going to want to put this spring on next, the star drag star, and you're going to want to make sure that it lines up right, because on the inside of the star drag is the square, it's cut out square for that nut. So you're going to want to push it. You see I'm not on it here, but if I turn it back and forth a little bit, it fits on right. I'm going to hold it down with my hand, put the handle on, and then put that nut on. I'm going to give the nut just a little bit of a tighten, because I'm not going to put the nut cap on yet with the screw that goes with it, which the screw's still in it. I'm going to set that aside, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this reel for a while and just let that grease work everywhere that it's supposed to work. I'm going to tighten the drag down, make sure that the spool's spinning, listen for any noise. Right now it sounds a little loud, but that's because the grease is only in certain spots, and what this is doing is this is mixing the grease. Sounds pretty good. It's getting there. It's starting to feel, you can feel it start to get easier to turn. And that's pretty good for a reel that's close to 20 years old. Spool spins okay. I did use factory bearings. I did not put high-speed bearings in this reel. All I did was replace the factory bearings. So it sounds pretty good. That noise is starting to go away. Like I said, that's just the grease starting to work in. And so the last thing to do is to put this nut cap on. What you have to do is make sure that if you look underneath the nut cap here, you can see the shape of the nut, and that a point of the nut is pointing at the hole for the screw. So what you want to do is tighten it in a way that, because you don't have to bear down on this, you just want to get it snug tight, and then because you want room to be able to adjust it so that the point of the screw fits and lines up with that hole for the, the point of the nut lines up with the hole for the screw, so that when you put this nut cap on, the hole lines up. And then you can screw it down. give it a little tighten, and then that's it. This reel's been cleaned, fresh oil, fresh grease. That handle turns pretty smoothly, especially considering this is a probably 20-year-old reel, 15 to 20-year-old reel. It'll do everything that he needs it to do. The spool spins all right. It's not going to spin like a brand new reel or a fairly new reel with high-speed bearings like Boca or Speed Spool high-speed bearings. But it does sound pretty good. It sounds a lot better now. Work that grease all in. You can see how easy this handle turns. And that's it. And that's how you reassemble a Curado, Bantam Curado CU-200, these green machines. The process is the same for the CU-200s or the CU-200 B5s. And there are some Siticas. The Siticas of this generation are the same as well. They just don't have as many bearings. They'll have plastic bushings instead of bearings. For example, underneath the spool tension cap, I believe. And underneath the drive shaft, they'll have a brass bushing instead of a bearing. But that's it. So again, please like, please comment, please subscribe. Comments will help me know what I need to do to make better videos, or if you want to let me know something you're more interested in, or I think that's my biggest area that I'm not comfortable with is the filming, the lighting. But if you have any questions on your reel, or if you're interested in wanting to learn more about taking care of your own reels, please comment, send me a message. But I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to my page and like this video. Hope you have a good day.